Okay, today we're going to talk about Tennessee and Bigfoot. Back around 1992, we had three young men in their late teens living way out in the thick woods. Now these thick woods had a rumor about unusual sounds, supposedly sounds that were knocking, screaming, and occasionally even something that sounded like growling. So it's just about dusk. These three gentlemen decide they're going to take a couple of flashlights and head out and see if they can find out exactly what's going on out in these woods. They went back through the woods. They went back past the horse trail that they had out in the woods, and they began noticing that there was trees that were pushed over, uprooted. They didn't seem to think much of it, just kind of peculiar that these trees were all laying there ripped out of the ground. Now they continued down the pathway. They came into a spot where they had to take a bit of a detour to an upper trail because it was getting kind of muddy ahead of them. So they took this bypass trail up where it was going to be a little bit drier to walk on. Then they decided after they were going down this that they ought to get off of the trail and hike out of there and see where things would end up. So they talked about it and decided that's what they were going to do. They hiked for about an hour and a half. They were laughing and talking it up, having a good time, almost daring anything that was out there to get in their way because they were ready for it. The guys stopped for a smoke break. They took a smoke break, and during a smoke break, one of the guys decided they felt a little uneasy. He said that they perhaps ought to get headed back. Now, the other two looked kind of oddly at this young man because he wasn't normally like this, but they agreed that they were going to leave and they were headed back to their civilization because they just did not find any strange screams, hollers, or growls. So they got going on the trail back past the river. They know that if you walk far enough along this trail, it meets a road and then curves again back into the woods. Neither of them had actually walked the entire length of this trail. In fact, they didn't think they really knew anybody that did, but they started walking, and all of a sudden, all of them, not just the one that was nervous before, all of them now have a sensation that they're being watched. At this point, the laughter and conversation died out. They weren't feeling funny or jovial. They knew something was odd, something was wrong. They continued on their journey, and they got to a part where it was extremely thick woods. Extremely thick and very dark. They were trying to get back to the road, which was their destination, but they weren't quite sure how far they were. They thought maybe they're 100 yards from the road. And then they heard something strange. A large branch broke. Now at this point, one of the young men broke ranks and headed toward the noise. The other two, they were not as inclined to put themselves out on a limb. They decided it was quite okay for him to go investigate, and he could come back and tell them what he saw. And they thought about it, and they thought, well, they'd better back up their friends. So they took their flashlights and headed toward the direction where they'd seen him run. They decided they'd better turn the flashlights off so as not to alert whatever was out there. They began sort of a half-hearted yell for their friend, hoping that he would respond and they could get this thing over with and get back to the safety of their house and talk over what strange things are going on. They heard a noise ahead of them coming through the wood. They were hoping, wishing that this was their friend coming, and it was. As they got to a close proximity, you could see that his face was absolutely filled with fear. He said that there was someone out there, and he was absolutely ready to leave. Time to go. They gathered their thoughts together, and then they headed toward what they assumed was their nearest exit, heading for that road again. Then they heard another branch break. This branch broke in the direction that they were wanting to go. Whoever or whatever it was seemed to be ahead of them. Now they knew what they had heard because this wasn't just a simple little twig breaking off. This was the sound of a large branch being ripped right from a tree. And of course it didn't take a genius to figure out that something big was necessary to break a good-sized branch off of the tree. They figured they had about 2 or 3 miles to get back home, so they had a very brisk walk going on, wishing that they could just get home really quick, instantly, but they had to go through the woods and whatever else was out there. As they proceeded on again, another branch broke. This time they stopped, crouched down, turned the lights off, trying to look and see who was out there. And after a brief period, they'd start their journey back home again. And again, same thing happened. Another branch break in the direction that they were going. And then there would be branches breaking to their left, to their right. Their journey got them back to the river. So they knew they were getting closer to heading back to the road. While they were at the river, they took a little time to catch their breaths and put their heads together and figure out exactly what was their choices. What were they going to do? All of a sudden, the air was filled with this horrific scream, the worst scream they'd ever heard in their life. The scream was so loud it echoed throughout the forest and down through the river. When interrogated, they figured that this scream probably stretched for at least a mile. You could have heard it. With the onset of that scream brought running. It was time to get home fast, pronto. They finally reached the house. They got inside, their dog began to bark, and the dog kept barking. They thought it was just because they came running home, and kind of surprised the dog. The dog was in a fenced area out back of the home. And one individual took a light and shined it around to where the dog was in the yard, and noticed that the dog was facing the woods, barking ferociously. He decided to retreat back into the house. As he did, he heard that awful scream again. They locked the doors, locked the windows, and they were going to spend the night in his home and hoped that they were going to be able to tell people about it. They weren't sure what was out there, but it did not sound friendly. And when they talked over their adventure that night, the one gentleman that ventured off on his own said he noticed a very foul-smelling odor when the branches broke, and it seemed like they were being chased. Very foul, very pungent odor, very nasty, something they never smelled before. Other people in the area had other instances of encounter with some kind of creature. People in the area said they noticed banging of wood, not just a little tapping, like someone taking a large piece of wood and smacking it into a tree. Another person noticed a large, dark figure. Another person also said that they had been outside and they heard a type of a growl and then a scream of a woman. Nobody knew exactly what was going on, but there was something in those woods. Something in the woods that they wish was not there. The consensus of the people that had been disturbed by these strange creatures in the woods, their thoughts was this was a Bigfoot. The screams, the growls, the wood knocking for communications, ripping branches, ripping trees out of the woods, all things that had been attributed to Bigfoot in other areas of the world. So they were all convinced this definitely was Bigfoot. Anyway, thanks very much for watching this Tennessee Bigfoot story. Please like, subscribe, share with like-minded friends. Feel free to comment. Thank you. Bye for now.